Welcome to the November 9th meeting of the Planning Commission. And would you call the roll, please, Sheila?
Mr. Bowser.
Here.
Mr. McFarland.
Wow.
Oops,
He's here.
he's here.
This would
Mr.
be the
Zimmerman.
time to remind everyone to silence their phones.
Mr. Matika.
Mike, are you here? Mr. Matika? He's here.
Are you here? Yeah. Mr. Broad.
Here.
Ms. Wintergren. Here. Mr. Shields.
Here.
Okay. Well, before we do get going, Dad, I'd like to welcome Dave Shields, Mr. Shields, to our Planning Commission. I believe this is your first meeting. Dave's at Strategic Resources at State Farm.
Right.
All right. Well, we're pleased to have you on the board.
Thank you.
We need to approve the minutes from September 7th. Like
So
to make a
moved.
motion? So moved. Second?
Second.
Second, moved and seconded. Any comments, errors, omissions? Okay, hearing none, we'll just let those stand as written. We have one public hearing tonight, and we are going to review the comprehensive plan. We're pretty excited about that. Mercy, do you have anything to do before we turn it over to Vasu?
Just very briefly, I'll say that we are going to give a presentation between Vasu and me. We'll kind of go back and forth a little bit, and then so if you could hold your questions till the end. We want to give this whole presentation so that if anyone wants to watch the video recording of this later, they'll be able to see the presentation all in one chunk.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's it.
And I'll turn it over to Vasu.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second half of Town and Normal Comprehensive Plan presentation. We did the first half at the Joint Council and Commission presentation October 16th. And what you'll see is we'll try not to cover the same aspects of the plan. This will, for those who haven't been able to see the presentation, the two videos together should be able to give a complete overview of the plan. So again, brace yourself. This is going to be about 50 minutes or so presentation. We'll try to go as quickly as we possibly can, but definitely no less than 50 minutes. Not to repeat myself from the last time, but for those of you who missed the process overview, this was a long, 2-year-long process, 24 months long process. So the first part of the process was community snapshot and outreach. Essentially, it's looking at existing data and information and maps, and also reaching out to the community. And I would like to remind the Planning Commission as well as the audience, anybody tuning in, that the outreach for this comprehensive plan was extensive. We've reached several hundred people. And what you see here is a reflection of the desires expressed by the community. And the second very important phase of this plan is the visioning, which is a process that Town Normal has in place for more than 20 years now. Yeah. So it is a very established process, mature process. We are very lucky to have that integrated in the comprehensive planning process, which allowed us to really make this truly comprehensive. So several of the elements that you see here go above and beyond what you would have seen in a traditional comprehensive plan. And the vision established by this group of people appointed by the mayor, several of you served on the vision committee, so you know how extensive those conversations were and how deep some of those went. And the vision established was, we have a place for you in our vibrant, prosperous, and diverse community. And so that's a very bold vision. So the plan was built on that very bold vision. There were 7 different advisory groups advising us on various subject matter experts. Several of you served on the advisory groups. Thank you. And the conversations here definitely were good debates. And the goals and action items that you see in this report were reflective not just of Planning Commission staff or town staff, but a very broad range of stakeholders from wide variety of backgrounds. So the final report has two major sections, elements and framework. We've covered a lot of subject that was presented in the elements during our last meeting. So today we will be covering the framework, partly because that is where majority of the land use and physical aspects of the plan are. So the 7 elements, again, I am not going to go into details of the elements, but I would like to remind the commission that these elements, the 2 key underpinnings of these elements are sustainability and technology. And when we say sustainability, it's just not environmental sustainability, but social, fiscal, and environmental sustainability and technology. Every single aspect has these principles interwoven throughout. Regionalism has been addressed quite extensively in these chapters because as a twin city for Bloomington, that's something that is many of these subjects, you cannot address these just within town and normal. And I will also point out that subjects like town and gown are very much normal specific and has resulted in some land use aspects that have not been in previous plans. Okay, so what is planning framework? Essentially, if we have to come up with one phrase for what it is, it's vision, values, and goals translated into land use planning. The words complete, connected, and compact, complete with neighborhoods that offer housing choices that welcome and accommodate variety of residents at various price points and ages, abilities, and different socio-economic backgrounds. And streets that promote active and healthy lifestyles, and centers of various sizes that become destination for all ages. Connected physically, socially, and technologically, and compact with land uses, diverse land uses, and density of those uses. Before I launch into the next aspects of planning framework, I thought this was an important map for us to share here. So the pink outline here, or whatever color is showing up there, purple, I guess, that's 1970 corporate boundary of town and normal. Red is 2010. During this time frame, population of town and normal has 150 years of history. We just celebrated 150. But majority of the growth for town and normal occurred in the last 50 years. In these 50 years, the town went from, the town's population nearly doubled, but the corporate area, those boundaries, more than doubled. They increased by 2.5 times. So during this time frame, some of the major land use and development trends across the country, not just here in Normal or Bloomington Normal area, but across the country, this is when suburbanization was rampant. Low density residential, disconnected street network. So this is the period that's typified by that. So please, as we move forward, expect the development patterns of neighborhoods and centers within those pink areas to be different than those in red areas. So why framework? If you look at the past plan, it calls for land uses, right? So it's very clear in these conversations that if we want to start establishing, if we want to grow as a complete, connected, and compact community, we cannot look at individual uses. It is time for us to transition from where we are to a community as envisioned. Uses will not facilitate that. We need to start looking at our geographies as places, not as uses. That's the only way we can transition from where we are to where we want to be, which is why it's a planning framework of places divided by geographies and place types. So this is a map that kind of shows those. It's the 3 major geographies that were addressed in the framework section are neighborhoods, centers, and corridors. So neighborhoods are divided based on their age. Again, if you remember the map for the development history, age has quite a bit of influence on development patterns, as well as influence, especially the university's influence on neighborhoods. So those are what dictated neighborhood boundaries. So for centers, there are multiple dimensions in which we analyze centers, but for the purposes of this map, they are classified based on their size and territory they serve. Corridors, there are 3 types of corridors. We'll go into those details. But for the mapping purposes, it's neighborhoods and centers that we have used. This map cannot be looked at in isolation. There is another important piece of map that should be read in conjunction with that map. And I'll go to the next map in a second. What I would like to point out here, when you see this map, some of the areas on the east side between Veterans Parkway and Towanda, you see a whole batch of yellow hashed neighborhoods. Those are the new neighborhoods. So please don't be alarmed that the plan is actually calling for all of that new growth. The next map, can you go to the next map, Mercy? So this is in this plan, the framework map must be read in conjunction with growth priorities map. The growth priorities map really does take into consideration the goals established by the various elements, and most importantly, the infrastructure chapter that really analyzes every single infrastructure system and availability of those systems, along with annexation, the current annexation status. So this map identifies 3 growth priorities. Tier 1, which is already annexed areas available for redevelopment or infill and redevelopment, and areas that are surrounded by the city with existing infrastructure. And a good example of such area would be in front of Heartland Community College, where you see that dark blue. So anything that's already part of Town of Normal is Tier 1, or anything that's already served very well and surrounded by Town of Normal is Tier 1. And based on our calculations, it is about 3.5 square miles, plenty for growth. Seriously? I did not realize I spent 10 minutes already. So I'll try to make it fast. And Tier 2 is an area that is immediately adjacent to Town of Normal, but may need additional infrastructure, not by the town, but by the developers, definitely. And Tier 3 is where town has to invest in infrastructure for development to happen there. So please keep these in mind, and as the planning framework must be read in conjunction with this. Okay? Can you go to the next one, Mercy?
I can.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Mercy now.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you, Vasu. So we'll start by talking about neighborhoods, and as Vasu mentioned, on the maps they're divided by age. And you start with old, which, I mean, I guess I could just read through the slide. It's a little irritating, I apologize, but they are categories. So old neighborhoods are those built before 1950. Early suburban would be 1950 to 1979. So I would say, who at the table lives in an old neighborhood? Show of hands. See, Rick? Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
And then early suburban. I'm early suburban. Yeah, okay. Newer suburban, 1980 to the present. So that leaves everybody else. Okay. And then emerging and future is what's coming next. The university influence neighborhoods, this is the first plan where we really talk specifically about the influence of the university on the neighborhoods, not necessarily in a good or bad way. I mean, there are just facts about that. There is an influence. The university zone itself encompasses all of the property that the university owns, which is a lot of property, and then areas several blocks from that. But when you look at university influence neighborhood number 1, that's the area that is closest to campus, that's predominantly student residences. So you can picture it in your mind. It's up towards Willow, it's east over to the east side of Uptown, parts of Main Street west of campus, south of Uptown, obviously, and even south of Vernon and towards the west. So these are areas that clearly the university and the students have an influence on the surrounding neighborhoods. When you look at the older and early suburban neighborhoods, they are very well situated to meet the 3 goals of our plan, this compact, connected, and complete. Why? Because if you're in an older neighborhood or an early suburban neighborhood, you're most likely going to be closer to some sort of commercial center, some place to go. There are a lot more diverse housing types within the older and early suburban parts of the community, particularly like you've got a mixture of two-story houses and one-story houses. You know, the parts of town that have the most ranches are going to be the early suburban neighborhoods like mine. The houses in these areas are more affordable and accessible to people, and they're attractive to all age groups. Interestingly, we have a lot of seniors that live especially in the ranch parts of town. Like I live in Pleasant Hills, and the number of homestead exemptions there is really high. Now those neighborhoods are starting to transition, and they're fantastically attractive to younger families too, because there's a lot of walkability. You can walk to a lot of the neighborhood schools in those areas. You're close to the Constitution Trail a lot of the time. So really, those two chunks of town are meeting a lot of our goals already, which is really exciting. But of course, those areas are pretty much built out, and any new growth is going to be incremental at best. So the recommendations in that part of town is really to maintain and preserve what we have, continue to maintain the infrastructure that the town owns. We could improve some of the connections. There are areas where we might have better trail access. Certainly technology, you see MetroNet and other companies running around town putting in fiber. That's going to help people be more connected. We also need to look at programming in those areas, supporting, again, that mixture of ages. And if there is additional housing built, like through redevelopment, through some natural disaster, who knows what, we need to make sure it's sensitive to the context of those neighborhoods. The newer suburban neighborhoods are a little less aligned with the 3 C's, the compact, connect, and complete. You can think of like an Ironwood. A lot of these neighborhoods are separated by significant roadways. They tend to be more homogeneous in the housing style, so you're going to see a lot of very similar home built throughout a whole subdivision. A lot of times they're all going to be 2-story. They're all going to be in a very narrow continuum of price, so they're pretty price segregated as well. These neighborhoods tend to be more expensive than the older neighborhoods, so they're a little less affordable. And the density that you get in those neighborhoods is really related to the pockets of apartment buildings that have been built. When you think about Ironwood Gardens or other pockets of townhomes here and there, but for the single-family detached portion of the neighborhood, it's not particularly dense. Now this map just shows you some of the areas of town where there's single-family development now, and when you go to those neighborhoods, there's an awful lot of empty space still. Well, there's a plan on paper that's been approved. It just hasn't been built out yet. And when you look at these areas in blue, there are about 3,600 approved units on that ground that could conceivably be built. They've already been approved. We don't see that happening anytime soon. Housing development has slowed down a lot. And even with what we have approved, we're hearing from developers that they'd like to maybe change what has been approved because they need to look at new models and new ways of marketing their products. So I guess the take home from this, though, is that we already have enough land that can be developed, and in fact, that's been approved for development that could accommodate almost all of the growth that we could reasonably expect in the next 20 years. So there would be no reason if somebody, for example, came in with a farm, east of Tawanda Barnes. There's really no reason why we would want to annex something east of Tawanda Barnes at this point, unless it were, I guess, something phenomenal. So this map is pretty important. The recommendations, of course, then are to just, not grow past the areas that we've already talked about. We want to keep it to the areas that have already been approved. We can look at annexation policies. When the elected leaders do decide to annex something, we could have a policy that has been approved that might say something like, new annexation needs to bring in a certain amount of diverse housing types. We need a certain kind of density. We need a certain, you name it, we could. Places do have policies in place that get somewhat specific on what it is you want when you're going to annex something. Because when the town annexes land, that's when the town has the most ability to demand something, like to say what the town wants. And so it's definitely an opportunity. Also, we need to continue working with Unit 5 on growth and development. That's not something we have a good history of, and that is not uncommon. The school district has its own authority, its own budget, and sometimes when they look for school land, given their budget constraints, they're looking for ground that's can be pretty far from town. And that's when you get like a normal community high school, which at the time was pretty far away.
And Mercy, can I add something there?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Particularly in this part of the town, the 2 Unit 5 elementary schools are they are at capacity and frequently kind of having to transport students to other schools.
Right, so the schools that are the most crowded right now are also the schools that are closest to all of the 3,600 units that are approved on paper. And that's not to say the school can't bus people around, because they can, but it does affect then walkability and other neighborhood aspects, so something to think about. In the university influence neighborhoods, as I mentioned earlier, this is a map that just shows you exactly what that's talking about. The heaviest black line shows the entire university influence zone. And then when you look at the UIN1, it's the dark maroon color that you can see is, just northeast of the ISU quad area, just southeast of the quad area. These are areas you know when you drive around town. And then the green color, the split pea soup color, I will say, is the neighborhoods that are just past that are not predominantly students, but feel the effects of it, because sometimes those houses may be just cheap enough for a parent to purchase for their multiple kids that might go through ISU, and it's cheaper for them to own a house and let their kids live in it for a few years rather than paying to live in a new apartment structure. And that can create conflicts with neighbors, just lifestyle differences. So we want to be sure that those areas next to the predominantly student areas are maintained. There's a lot of good, affordable housing in there, great locations. A lot of people do want to live near the university, but don't want to live like right on top of the student area. So there's always going to be a little conflict, but what we can do to minimize that, we want to try. So what can we do in that area? We can enhance the public spaces. We can make the streetscapes more beautiful. We can improve multimodal options. So in the student area, we could be, or the whole university influence zone where you have the most people, you could have better bus stops, which Connect Transit's been working on that. Now they have a lot more covered bus shelters. You could have bus shelters that have Wi-Fi hotspots. You could have wider sidewalks in areas where there's just a lot more pedestrians. You could have more bike lanes. There's just all sorts of things you could do to make getting around without being in your own car easier and more pleasant. In the UIN1 area where most of the students live, we want it to feel welcoming to them. Like, we don't want them to feel harassed or that there's something wrong with their lifestyle. So we need to support dense and affordable housing, and we really need to think again about our parking regulations. And we've done a lot of thinking about that over the years in the student areas. Really, I guess, Rick, you'd be the only one on the commission who was there when the parking impact zone was first implemented, and that was because there were some real issues, and that was, 20 years ago now almost, when the idea was get as much parking as possible onto every new development. Well, what that means is you end up getting buildings that are built around parking, which means the buildings aren't very pretty, and the site is just designed around the cars parking. That's changed. We now don't require quite as much parking, and we know that student driving habits are changing. So there's going to be a lot to look at in the next couple of years, and the developers themselves will have all sorts of opinions about this. So even if we don't require a lot of parking, they may want to provide a lot of parking. It's hard to know. So we definitely need to rethink it in the UIN1 area in particular. And then in UIN2, we really want to work at protecting the affordability and the good maintenance of single-family neighborhoods, because those are really important. It's good workforce housing. It's great location, lots of opportunities. So Vasu, I'll turn it over to you for centers.
Awesome. So centers are really the hubs for activities, commercial, educational, recreational opportunities. This is one of those things where we could have picked a different, several ways in which we identify centers, but for the purposes of the map, of the framework map, we've used the scale of the centers and the area that they serve. So we have neighborhood centers, local centers, regional centers, and town centers. They're pretty self-explanatory. Neighborhood centers serve one or two neighborhoods. Local centers serve Bloomington normal area, or should I say normal Bloomington area.
You should.
And regional centers draw people from outside. Town center, again, is special with its unique characteristics. So these are the 4 types of centers that we have identified on the map. If you go, and again, most of the regional centers are definitely outside of the university. Regional centers are all along the periphery and along the highways. These numbers, probably in a few months, you probably will be able to associate a number with the name of the area, like RC3 means nothing right now, but it's actually the Mitsubishi area. And we've used these codes to do a lot of classification and analysis within the report. So you'll probably be looking at these a lot more closely. So before I go into the details, I will say that neighborhood centers, they don't exist. In all honesty, they do not exist. At least the way we have envisioned, they don't exist. And they don't exist for a reason. They have been, there are several challenges for neighborhood centers to really thrive. However, there are multiple changes coming down the pike for centers. The changes in shopping behavior, the changes in how people are now more experiential shopping and online shopping. So the biggest threat that we have right now is for our RC6, which is Veterans Parkway type of retail that has big strip malls, if we haven't seen that in the news lately. So there is opportunity for neighborhood centers, but I think the report is very clear to say that there are plenty of challenges, and unless we are very, very conscious about making neighborhood centers happen, it is not. They are still not at a point where they can organically happen. They still need assistance. So if you look at these centers, many of them are technically commercially successful. However, if we apply a 3C criteria to these, they fall short. So the next slide, I'll be going back and forth between this slide and the next slide, so bear with me. Mercy, can you go to the next slide? So we've looked at these centers to see how they compare to 3Cs, and several centers definitely fall short of 3C criteria. Partly because many of these are actually developed along highways and very much auto-oriented. If we had clean slate, it would be easy to put everything the way we want, but chances are we'll never have a clean slate. So we looked at the redevelopment potential for each of these centers, and this classification here shows the opportunities for those redevelopment. There are a few typos here, so please ignore those. But overall, emerging centers are centers that have plenty of vacant land or underutilized property. That presents a great opportunity for us to plan carefully to allow them to grow the way the plan envisions, complete, connected, and compact. Evolving centers are centers that are commercially successful but might have some opportunities as we look at transitioning. So that RC6, that is our Veterans Parkway, so there will be opportunities. And I'm going to use an example, college and veterans, I think is a great example. A whole bunch of redevelopment happened that could have been a great opportunity to see how can we transition into a much more complete, connected, and compact center. Established really means we saw little opportunity for these centers to evolve in the next 20 years. Not because they're already meeting the criteria, but because there is a typo there, RC3 does not belong there. These are centers that are owned by institutions, and town has little or no control, and they usually they have their own plans, so we don't see those changing too much. Others are mostly recreational centers, parks, and so on. The two special centers that are on here are a town center, of course, uptown, and then LC5, which is One Normal Plaza, Normandy Village, and Route 66. So that entire area. So the reason these two are identified as special centers is given their special characteristics and unique characteristics that they bring to the community. So before I go into recommendations, I do want to point out that the report actually goes into great detail on opportunities and challenges that each of these centers have as they evolve in the next 20 years. If you have any questions about those, I can take those at the end. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go specifically into each of those. Recommendations, overall, when we talk about compact, centers is where we see most of the opportunity. Mercy pointed out parking. We have plenty of parking in these centers. So definitely there is an opportunity for increasing the density and intensity of these centers and making them more of a mix of uses. So right now, residential within these centers is incidental every once in a while, but we need to be more intentional about integrating residential. Improving multimodal access. Each of these we have to prioritize our actions, and improving multimodal access to centers should be highly prioritized. Emerging or special centers, emerging centers are those that have the most opportunity to grow in the next 20 years. And special centers like Uptown and LC5 are other centers that really need to be studied much more carefully than what the scope of this plan allowed us to. So these areas need to have area plans for them to grow the way we have identified in the plan. Facilitating transition of evolving centers. This is going to be tricky because every opportunity, I think it's going to be a balance between regulation and working with the developers, education, incentives to help them evolve from where they are today to where we want them to be. And definitely reinvigorating neighborhood centers has been identified as a big recommendation for this.
Okay, so now I'm going to run through corridors so you can picture we talked about neighborhoods where people are living, centers where people are going, the corridors are how they get there. It's the ligaments. I don't know, there's probably some metaphor that I could be using. But the types of corridors we have are transportation corridors, cultural corridors, and natural corridors. The transportation corridors are kind of what you'd think, mostly the streets. We also have railroads running through town, and then transit. And so those are all three really important. For cultural corridors, we've identified those as the Route 66 corridor and the Constitution Trail. And then the natural corridors would be primarily Sugar Creek and also the detention basins that are located throughout the community. And of course, some of these have overlap, so sometimes when I see natural corridor, I think of the Constitution Trail right away because it is also a natural corridor. But for the purposes of this plan, we've divided them in the way that I just listed. This is a map showing you I'm going to call this the functional classification system, Jean Brown. Yes, it is. This is something that engineers and planners have used for many years, and this is an important classification based on basically the size and the capacity of different roadways. And this is historically how we've divvied up money through the MFT funds and like money that comes from the federal government through the state to the community. You know, there's all sorts of rules that are tied to this functional classification system, and it's not going to go away, and that's fine. But historically, this has been primarily looking at how many vehicles are you moving? What's the capacity to move vehicles? And in this plan and in many other plans that we've been talking about for the past many years, we're interested in our transportation corridors doing more than that. We want them to be beautiful, we want them to be safe, we want them to be convenient for all modes of transportation, whether you're on foot, on a bike, if you're using Connect Transit, whatever it is, transportation corridors need to work for everyone. So we'll be putting a lot more thought into that in the next few years. Recommendations include focusing more on transit-oriented development. The town has a pretty strong history of working with Connect Transit, as does the city of Bloomington, so we will continue on that path. The Complete Streets policy, which the town actually adopted about a year ago, that's already on the books. And as the name suggests, a complete street is more than just vehicular traffic. It's all other modes, and we've been working on that, especially through our bicycle and pedestrian master plan now for several years. Another recommendation is to partner on implementation of plans like the Main Street Plan. That's a big one because, as you may or may not know, the town does not own or control Main Street. It's the Illinois Department of Transportation, and yet it's one of our most highly visible, important transportation corridors in town. I would argue it's not succeeding from an aesthetic point of view, and it travels right by one of our biggest employers, Illinois State University and Advocate Bromen, that have both put an enormous amount of investment into their own properties, and yet you've got Main Street right next door is what it is. I mean, we can picture it. So in order for us to do anything with that, we need to work on implementing a plan that's already been developed for it, and that's going to require partnership with IDOT, with ISU, with all sorts of people. And that'll be exciting, but it's not easy because there's not a lot of money flowing through IDOT these days, so we'll just keep working on it. Cultural corridors, mentioned Old Route 66, the Route 66 Trail, and the Constitution Trail. There's just a whole lot of economic development potential for both of these. We know that we get visitors coming to town on Route 66 and coming to visit Constitution Trail. I would say we have not come even close to capitalizing on all the potential there. So this plan definitely recommends taking a harder look at that. So the recommendations include ways we can celebrate these corridors, whether it's with art or other events, making sure that any development along these corridors is sensitive to the nature and character of each corridor, and also encouraging trail-oriented development. There are communities where businesses will be oriented towards something like the Constitution Trail. I mean, I've visited places like that before, and or housing being oriented that way. We have a couple of examples, but not many. So those are among the top recommendations. The final category is natural corridors. Sugar Creek and our detention basins. I don't know if any of you have been following the wild turkey news, but we do have turkeys wandering around Normal right now, largely in part because of the natural corridors we have, including the Constitution Trail. There's a lot we can do to continue protecting these. We can support the expansion of these corridors. We can be protecting our streams through things like our stream buffer ordinance, and also the way the town is changing its creek maintenance protocol. We're not doing as much mowing. We're trying to do more with native plant species, et cetera. The town needs to be looking at new opportunities for green infrastructure like rain gardens, bioswales, things that really work. And also look at enhancing our bicycle and pedestrian connections, because really when people want to be on a bike or go for a run, most people like to run on a tree-lined area, some with beautiful trees to look at and whatever else, and you see it every day on the trail. There's thousands of people on the Constitution Trail. So the more we can make connections, the better.
So I thought you were talking about land use. I can.
Oh yes, sorry, you should. Yes, I can talk about this too. So in the plan, you may have run across this illustration, and this shows you the neighborhoods and centers, and it shows you the categories we've already run through, and then it puts them up against a list of the types of uses that may or may not be appropriate for those different areas. It's all color-coded, so these uses are characterized as either something that should be allowed, or better yet, encouraged, or discouraged, or it's okay, but only if it's really context sensitive. And so, for example, it wouldn't surprise you, industrial is pretty much just discouraged in the neighborhoods. That's not a surprise. But you may be surprised that there are actual recommendations within UIN1, where we have predominantly dense student housing. We're discouraging low-density residential. Now, why would anyone try to build low-density residential in that area? I don't know. But the concept is there. I mean, there are some places where low-density residential just isn't appropriate. It's a lost opportunity. So I'm not going to run through every color and every line, but just know that as new development is proposed, this is the kind of chart that we would go to say, okay, how does this line up with our goals?
Okay, so in this plan, you probably saw a whole bunch of numbers. So that is because while we recognize that not all these aspects that we are proposing can be measured, there are several soft aspects of places and your experiences that absolutely cannot be measured. However, we also know that what gets measured gets done. So in here, it was this plan goes to great lengths to actually put a number and a target on where we see the neighborhoods are today and where we want them to be. And I'll just use one of the examples like housing type diversity index. We've used different types of housing, and when I say different types of housing, not all single family is created equal. There are sizes of single family. Some are 2 bedrooms, some are 3, some are 4, so on and so forth. So the diversity index takes all of that into account and looks at how diverse a neighborhood is. And the idea is to make sure that we have a wide variety of housing choices within every neighborhood. So we have 30 plus metrics. I'm not going to go through those, but these metrics are trying to measure where neighborhoods and centers are and corridors are today and where we want them to be. Targets, again, are different for each of these areas because they're starting at different places. So we are not naive to think all neighborhoods are going to achieve these within the next 20 years. So it's very important for us to have realistic targets. So for implementation, again, I think it's very, very important for us to continue to prioritize these. The plan does prioritize geographies and does identify quick wins, but I think further prioritization is absolutely needed as the town does capital improvement planning. And most importantly, you'll see this more than once to align regulations and incentives to the current plan, because some of the regulations are definitely many decades old. I know we talked about parking. Another regulation like that is home occupation, or what's defined as home occupation. So, some of these have just not been touched, and we just have to go back and look at, do they apply and are they forwarding the goals of this plan? And again, continuing to measure progress, because if we measure, we do that. We pay attention to that. If we don't, that just never gets done. And last but not the least, collaboration. I know we emphasized on this very much during our last presentation, and I cannot underscore this enough. This plan, the scope of this plan goes above and beyond any one department or one agency. So the town should absolutely seek to collaborate between ISU and regional entities. And we've mentioned IDOT, so several projects in here cross borders and cross agency jurisdictions. So collaboration is the key. All right, that's all we have. 40 minutes.
So this is it's a big document, and we are here to answer as many questions as you'd like to ask and or just talk about what you have read. There is no pressure to, resolve all issues right now, but.
And one that comes to my mind, particularly when I think of the Parkway kind of enterprises, where, again, I'm seeing in Chicago suburbs now these 3- and 4-story residence above retail kind of things. When a developer comes in, is there a mechanism to nudge them in that direction, or, kind of?
I'd say no.
No.
In the Uptown Normal is the only part of our community where there's a code that actually has a minimum height
Okay.
of 2 stories. And there are actually a couple places that have gotten a variance from that, but that is literally the only mandatory.
Because the Main Street, the form-based code is an option,
Sure.
and that does, as Mercy just mentioned, mandate, minimum heights and very specific uses above, the first floors. And
Yeah.
So no, the short answer is not really at this time.
Because I'm just trying to think, when you look at, the life of a big box store is what, 10, 15 years?
25, 30, who knows? It's not a long time. It's not 100 years.
So in a sense, as those properties, many of them are going to become either up for remodeling, rebuilding, and I know there's going to be pressure on the town oftentimes for incentives to do that. And just made me very curious that there is, I think, an excellent model to create a little more density in those areas. Certainly got the parking, but how do you
Right.
encourage that besides nodding your head and say, sure, we like that?
Yes, certainly if the town is participating financially, we have all sorts of flexibility, unless it gets to the point that a deal gets scuttled, if you're asking too much. I know years ago, when we talked about the mall becoming a lifestyle center, when it became Shops at College Hills, there were such things going on in the country that were being completely redeveloped with housing incorporated. And we weren't sure when this started to happen what we were going to get, and that's not what we got. And it's not a market that I guess people felt comfortable with here. And then we also remember when Potbellies and Noodles came in on Main Street, there was talk for a while, like, couldn't you put an extra floor or 2 on there and have residential? Well, there was nowhere to park. So the answer was no. Now, maybe someday we live in a world where none of those people have a car, and it doesn't matter that Potbellies Noodles parking lot is tiny, but that wasn't the case when it was developed. So people run into spatial constraints when you start adding residential.
Mm-hmm. And I also would like to add something, Mike, is majority of these retail, the transformation is happening by bringing people there, whether it's fitness centers or, restaurants, clearly, but most importantly, residential is what becomes this built-in audience. So majority of the redevelopment of these empty commercial strips is looking at how can we have built-in audience closer to this center.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I have a question, but first I'll thank you two for both presenting.
Thank you.
Bringing us up to speed here. I think one of the interesting parts of this plan is it's very regional. It's going to involve a lot of partnership. And I should probably know the answer to this, but I don't. Bloomington did their plan first, right? Are they also in line with the 3 Cs?
Yes, they don't, it obviously doesn't say 3 Cs, but very much in line with this, yes.
So the same sort of planning goals?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I have to say technology has been emphasized a lot more in this plan because in just the last few years, 3 years ago when I went to a national planning conference, there was one session on autonomous vehicles. Last year, there was probably 15 or 16, including a demonstration of an autonomous vehicle. So it has changed quite a bit in the last 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions? Just digested that whole report. Yeah, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I'll further say thank you for the work that you both have put into this, including everybody else that's been involved. I guess where I'll start tonight is what is the town expecting of us as the Planning Commission? The purpose of being here, besides if any of the individuals out here want to hear, are we analyzing and then saying, here's what we're giving a little bit of perspective on as we're going through? Because one of the areas I can directly use an example here of, I do think that we should come up with policies that are not so stringent that it makes it very difficult for the developers. But I do feel if we are trying to set a destination of where we want our community to go, and I already think that because of economy and other things that are going on, that our community is starting to already feel some of the constraints of not having the right housing and different things because we built for what the world thought we wanted, and now all of a sudden we don't necessarily want all of that's out there. So how's it, as a commissioner, what is it, are we looking for us? What are we supposed to do in this process? Because obviously we're making a recommendation to the council, but I don't know about anybody else. Maybe everybody else is like, hey, here's exactly what we need to do, but I need a little clarification if we could.
Well, I think, one of the first things that'll have to happen after the council adopts this is that the council's going to have to give some direction on priorities. And so, because we can't implement all this at once. And there are aspects of this that very clearly would require changes to our zoning code. So one of the early recommendations might be taking a hard look at big chunks of the zoning code. And if we do that, that whole process would run through you. So then you'd have an opportunity to directly weigh in on how might parking regulations change, or how might the size of single-family lots change, or, that sort of thing. So that would be one very specific example, but that would be big, that would be big. Another thing would be, every time a development comes through, if somebody meets code perfectly and you're basically just holding a public hearing and there's not a lot of flexibility to demand things, that's one thing. If they're meeting code, they're meeting code. But where we get things like planned unit developments or people who want variances as part of their site plan, then you can start thinking, well, how does what they're proposing sync up with these goals that we have? And that's part of your discussion. And town staff might make a recommendation that you don't think goes far enough, or maybe it goes too far. But those are a couple of areas where I could really see you playing a role in this.
I'd agree. It's a filter that you're going to sort of look at what the requests are, the proposals.
Okay, so I guess where my final question, at least to have at this point, is where we see in government that there's usually a lot of lack of planning. It's wonderful that we've gone through all of this to plan. We've done it in the past. Is there anything that would help us as we now are going into this next planning phase of stuff. Because for me, this is the first time, and I've been here for 10 years. So maybe Rick has some old wisdom to give us and everything, a part of the process. Mercy, you've been out here quite a while. Greg, you've been here. So from the standpoint of, is there anything as commissioners that there'd be advice and everything to help us as we're moving through this new stage of kind of a change? Or just go through it and?
Great question.
Right.
Because so much of this is, I mean, this is a very different plan. And again, Mercy and Vasu just touched on two basic elements. I mean, there's a lot more to this plan in general that is less relevant to the commission regarding land use. But I'll go back to what Mercy mentioned, is that what's tricky about this, and as we've gone through this for the past couple of years, from the development community, things have just been very quiet. That's where we're at right now. And so, you know, the plan gets adopted and then say something, you know, the economy picks back up and, you know, if it goes back to status quo, we're gonna be faced with some tough decisions, you know, because again, this is suggesting a very different approach and philosophy about development. The normal's been, I think, good about being more mindful about trying to be more sustainable and conservative and that kind of thing, as opposed to our partners and to the south, which is just a different philosophy. But so, you know, the first thing I thought of, Michael, kind of to your question, is that this gets adopted and endorsed and this becomes the new way that we're going to develop in Normal. It's going to absolutely require an overhaul to our current zoning code, period, which in and of itself is frightening to us.
Yeah, and it would
'Cause
require
that's-
outside assistance. I don't
Yeah.
know that we could pull that off
Because,
in-house.
Rick, you probably know because you've been around longest, but it's not like we've just been sitting on the zoning code for a long period of
No.
time. There's a lot of
No.
amendments that have taken place to that document over the past 15 or 20 years in response to what's been going on. But this, again, will be just a whole separate set of
Right.
issues.
And I think we've actually been relatively progressive on how
I've
we
tried to be,
handled
yeah.
that, with overlay zones and, you know, other sort of ways you can kind of encourage development along. But it is an encouragement process, so.
Well, I mean, and not all of it, not all of it are things that I think developers are gonna just absolutely hate. I mean, we talk to the developers even still pretty routinely. I mean, they know what's going on. If anything in here were insane, we'd be hearing about it. And if you think back to the last 5 or 6 years, with development slowing down so much and employment figures changing and the kinds of people coming in and out of town, we've had developers coming to us now for years to ask to amend their plans to make them a little denser, to make the lots a little smaller. We hear from them all the time, when are you gonna get the trail closer to this development? I'm not saying they're gonna run up and embrace this document like, yay, but there is some of this the world is changing and people see it. So it's pretty in line with that direction, I think, which is fortunate for us. We're not actually trying to force some sort of change that's not already kind of happening.
So a couple of things. One, as part of the first phase of outreach, we sat down with developers, realtors, builders to really understand what the pain points are and where they see this going. And absolutely, they know that the single-family residential that they have been building is not going to go anymore. And that's something that we've heard loud and clear. But what I also would like to add, we talked about regulation. Of course, a lot needs to change. But there is an aspect to this where there is education and some level of additional planning that needs to happen. When I say education, when we talk about smart growth and different types of housing typologies and stuff, we need to, so aesthetics is something that cannot be regulated. So that's something that developers and builders need to be educated on, so we get different types of development. So it needs to be a balance between regulation and allowing the developers to be creative to bring in innovative models.
Any other questions? We do have a couple of people in the audience. We do open the public hearing. Would either of you like to speak?
My name's Scott Hall. I'm new to the town. We are
We do ask you, Scott, if you don't mind, if you come up, and then we just ask you to say your name. We actually just get you on record. Nothing serious or bad will happen to you because of that.
And the recording can pick up your voice.
Then we can all hear, sure. So,
My name's Scott Hull. I am from northern Kentucky near Cincinnati. I
Okay.
represent a developer, builder, and shopping center owner.
oh,
And we are currently in negotiations for a large part of the Constitution Trail Shopping Center area.
oh,
And I'm here just to listen to what your vision is for Normal, learn a little more about the town, and I just happen to have a nice evening to listen to the Planning Commission.
Can honestly say I've never heard that.
It's all exciting stuff. Just listening to what you're saying, and our company is involved in mostly retail shopping centers, but around the country, and we see a lot of what you folks are talking about and working, and even in our greater Cincinnati area, we have some of these types of things going on, and they're working hard to do interconnected neighborhoods and transportation corridors that work for both the bulk of, the car bus type of stuff, but a lot of bicycle trails, walking trails, neighborhood access type of neighborhood, meaning maybe a dozen shops in an area with a couple restaurants and a pharmacy and a couple things, access to those points. So it's all exciting stuff. You have a lot to look forward to. So.
all right. Before you get away, I was supposed to get your address. Do you have an address? we
Sure.
can-
Yeah. My personal address is 11
Or-
Winding
yeah.
Way in Crestview Hills, Kentucky.
Okay. And you affirmed to tell the truth,
How-
right? We knew
Yes.
that.
Right, did you?
The company I work for is Houck Holdings out
Oh.
of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
Yes.
I've been to Cincinnati. They're doing some interesting things.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cincinnati has had its ups and
Yeah,
downs, and
yeah.
they are, Cincinnati is a number of neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods are the strong part of Cincinnati. Downtown Cincinnati is kind of fun, and they've done a lot of development that, in fact, interesting enough, the plan for the downtown development was put together in 1940, and we're just starting to realize it now, so it takes a while.
All right. Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
And anybody else?
Bob, I do have a question. It's
Sure. Dave, go ahead.
a combination newbie question and kind of following up what Michael and actually our guest just said. This is something brand new and way cool. Is there going to be a mechanism or some sort of plan on telling us how we're doing regularly?
Oh, like a
Yeah.
dashboard or something?
I think that it's recommended in there, right, that we do some sort of reporting? Yeah.
Integrated in annual reporting. We have, the appendix of this report has Excel spreadsheets, which will be given to staff that they can plug numbers in to see if, not that a ton of new development is going on, but if new development goes in, they'll be able to plug numbers in to see if it has changed where the neighborhood used to be and where it is now. And of course, there is also connectivity metrics like Constitution Trail, miles of Constitution Trail, miles of complete streets implemented, so on and so forth.
And that's something that the commission will be accessing or looking at just on our own?
Well, we've never done it before, so there is no real answer. Except I would think we would definitely want to make it available to you. There are other annual reports that I'm doing now that I've never done before, like a complete streets annual report and a report on our bike ped master plan progress. So there's a lot of overlap in all of these annual reports, to be honest. And we already do a really thorough annual report every year of all the departments in the town, in case you're interested. I mean, it's fantastic information, but you'll see that every year out of us for all the commissions, and then the planning department as a whole, the inspections department. But yeah, it's a good point, though. I mean, whatever report we generate out of this, we should be sharing with you, for sure.
I'm assuming those are on the webpage, right?
Yeah, the department reports are all online, and they've been online for years. They're really good if you have time.
Yeah, but if you don't know you're there and you're not looking for
Right,
them,
you
yeah.
just wouldn't.
right.
Yeah.
Like, I think I've never sent you an email saying, hey, the annual reports are out, here's a link. I could do that. I just never have, but I should, so note to self.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else in the audience?
Mr. Chair,
All
can
right.
can I make a comment that
Sure.
might prompt some more conversation, not on purpose, but, because I know one of the things that we talked about quite a bit was very different in this plan from past comprehensive plans, is that all the existing built inventory was just kind of left alone and shaded in gray. And this plan, and it was all about what's
What's
new and
next?
different, what's next. This is very different, and, but as part of that, I know there was a lot of staff discussion and steering committee discussion about the university influence zones. And I know as this thing, over the years, becomes implemented in some fashion, that will absolutely be something that I think we'll hear from our residents about. This plan suggests density, and it talks about doing different things to maintain older neighborhoods and do better things about keeping, the students happy in their space and that kind of thing. But this plan does suggest some different things that way. And again, that's another one of those things a little bit daunting to us when this actually becomes, this is the easy part, quite honestly, even though it's taken 2 years. This is, implementation and what this all looks like and trying to bring this to life is going to be challenging.
So he's talking about the first litmus test, whenever that comes.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Well, what's next?
Well, you have a couple options. One is
Are
you
we
can,
looking for a motion?
yeah, at some point you need to take a vote and make a recommendation to the town council, like any item you would normally look at.
And
Now,
that includes not only what we saw today, but what we saw on video? What are we actually approving today?
what the video was just talking about the elements part
The
of this
elements
plan.
part.
So together, both presentations are this plan. So you would be taking action on this plan.
plan.
The plan, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You can do that tonight. You can carry it over if you want for some, I'm not recommending that. I can say that we've just done as much as we could to get the word out. We've gotten, to be honest, very little feedback, which is a combination of a lot of people do not pay attention. And also, I think there must not, if there were anything in here that were that crazy, we'd be hearing a lot more about it. Now, we've gotten some negative comments, but literally the comments we've gotten have been very, very minimal. So if you carry it over, I would expect much the same of not many people here. I could be wrong, and we would not do a presentation again. So, but that's up to you.
And I guess, again, we had a meeting this morning where we talked about, we have this meeting tonight, and I think Mercy and I both agreed, and Rick, you would probably, with the history, if we were doing this 12, 15 years ago, a plan of this magnitude and something this substantial, there would be a lot of people
There
here.
would be.
There would be attorneys and developers and builders and that kind of thing. It's just in a very different time right now. Things are
Right.
just,
But I think you've reached out, you've
Oh,
talked
right.
to those
Oh, yeah.
people,
Oh, yes.
and which we did before as well.
Yeah.
Right,
But
right,
nonetheless, I
right.
think it's a
Yeah.
little different times.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to put forth a recommendation of approval of the comprehensive plan.
All right, as written, is there a second? Thank you.
Second.
So we do have a motion and a second to approve the comprehensive plan. Any other discussion up here?
Again, just commendations for a great job and involving, especially with the real effort to involve as many sectors of the community as possible. Real forethought went into that, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
I would further follow up with, yes, there's been a lot of work that's been done on this plan. For those of you that may not have been able to go or be a part of the housing study that was done, I would encourage you to go out and read the information, because there was a lot of great content that then flows back into all of the stuff that we're going to have to make decisions on potentially over the course of the next 20 years. So I would take the time and look at all of that. So,
Okay,
but
Thank
thank
you.
you for your work.
thank you, yeah. And Mike wants to serve for 20 more years. Did you hear that?
Excellent.
Always glad to hear that. Thank you.
That's not what I said.
Okay, I guess if there are no more comments or questions, we just call the roll. Sheila?
Mr. McFarland,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmerman,
Yes.
Mr. Matika,
Yes.
Mr. Broad,
Yes.
Ms. Wintergren,
Yes.
Mr. Bozer,
Yes.
oops, Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Did that wrong, but that's okay.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very
Um,
much.
Yes, and just FYI, we will have something on the agenda for December, so let me know. I know Tracy can't make it, so just let me know if you cannot make it. I don't anticipate it being a long meeting, but there will be a couple items, so.
Well,
I think that's it for tonight.
Yes, and then this will go to.
This will go to the town council on November 20th. All right,
So that'll
thank
be
you.
December 7th?
Yes, yes. Is that Pearl Harbor Day? We'll be here on Pearl Harbor Day, so there you go.